Welcome to this entirely different format for our gardening group. Typically, here at Archie on the first Thursday of each month, we gather and we talk about everything related to gardens, mostly edibles, but really everything related to gardens. And the interaction is fun, and we enjoy one another and our successes and failures. But obviously, we aren't able to do that during this time period. So I'm going to attempt to produce some videos for you that I think might be helpful, and also helpful to new gardeners, those who've not had the exchange of ideas that we've experienced, and there might be some basics that we just skip over that would be very helpful to them. So you'll find both. I'm going to go back and do some of the basics, and I'm also going to show you some things I've learned this year and some things about new resources, ways I've learned to use food, because that's always an ongoing challenge, is when the garden's producing, is finding ways to utilize all those good fresh veggies. So anyway, and at the end, you'll have an opportunity, if you have questions to interact that you want to leave for me, or if you want to email me as well. It's callanG@cascolibrary.org, and we'll get back to you with that. People, it seems like this year, are interested in growing food like I've not experienced before. There has been a rush of new gardeners. If you've been shopping for seeds, you've noticed that. If you've been shopping for gardening equipment, you've noticed that. And I'm a little protective over these new gardeners because there is so much information out there. And gardening is very regional, and I would even say it's site specific. So if you are you've recently moved to this area, or you've even recently moved from one house to another, you're going to find very different gardening challenges in your new location. So there's a part of me that wants to protect from a lot of work and a lot of needless work by starting with some basics, or going back to some basics that are important. Edibles have always been my focus, and I am one that looks at the whole picture. I try to look at the space available and how can I best utilize it. We're on a farm. We have wide open spaces, but we have a wooded area next to us. So we have also lots and lots of insects and critters. But in our space, what we do is that the plants that need the most care are closest to the house. The things that need less care are further away. Some of it has to be protected by electric fence, simply because there's no other way to protect from deer and raccoons and things like that. And then we have the things out on the outer limits, we call it, the things that we just kind of ignore. And if we ever needed them, they're there. But I don't regularly harvest. I would even put elderberries in that category. We don't take care of them. This year we did harvest and made elderberry syrup for the first time, but they are Missouri native that really don't require any care. Jerusalem artichokes are another Missouri native that don't require care and are on the outskirts. And then Malabar spinach, some of those things, those more unusual things, even okra. Okra just grows. So I honestly have not had time to do anything with those things, but they're on the outskirts. And then the things that are the herbs, the things that I use all the time, my basil is the thing closest to my kitchen. So you will develop your style as well with the things that you find you grow and you also use. My background, my most recent purchase is this marvelous book, Garden Insects. Horticulture specialist from K-State recommended this as the best insect guide in North America. And it's pricey, and I put it off. As you can see, it's huge. But if you're wanting to see the life cycle of an insect, like these are Japanese beetles, and they're the things that will just destroy a fruit tree if you're not careful. You can see each stage of the life cycle. Then you can learn how to disrupt that life cycle and control them in the most effective way. So anyway, this is one of my most recent purchases. My other one is a garden hose. That's my love language. Garden tools, garden hose. Anyway, I have been a serious gardener for about 40 years. In 2010, my husband and I had the opportunity to travel throughout the nation and see gardens from California through different parts of Missouri and the Midwest. Some were very much market gardens where people were just concentrating on getting things to market. Others were just for beauty. Some of the California gardens were just for beauty. But I found that gardening is very, very regional and also very site specific. So if you're learning about gardening from a book, keep that in mind because many of those gorgeous photos are California gardens where they don't have the weed pressure that we do in Missouri. So in Missouri, um, um, it's challenging because every season is different. This year we had extremely hot weather through the summer. Some places had lots of rain, some had very little rain. There were wind. Um, Recently, it has finally cooled off a bit, and I want to do a parenthesis here for those of you who already have your space there and ready. It's not too late to plant for fall gardens, but you need to do it this weekend. Um, Things like salad greens, spinach, kale, turnips, radishes, those kinds of things. But do it quickly because the shorter days means that it takes longer for them to grow to maturity. I have a little video I'm hoping to get attached to this of my garden, my fall extension garden. And extended season garden, and there are green beans that were planted like mid to late July, and they are blooming and they're beautiful. Green beans don't mind the hot weather, and fall beans are often the very best because they like when they're ripening or developing in the cooler weather, they're just crispier and just better quality. And then there's spinach, turnips, kale, I have some lettuce and then broccoli, cauliflower, and cabbage plants. And for those of you who like fall spinach or early spring spinach, you can go ahead and plant it now. The challenge with spinach is it does not germinate in hot soil. So it's really hard to get it to come up. And I only had probably 10% of what I planted that has come up so far, but most of it eventually will. Just be aware of that. So it's not too late at all for spinach, and then you can mulch over it, and it will be your very first thing to harvest in the spring. Then kale is easy this time of year, and like I said, lettuce, turnips, radishes, all those things are very easy. If you already have your plants in the ground, the broccoli, cauliflower, and cabbage will develop in the fall. They're challenging as well because you're dodging those August cabbage worms and all the insects that come out in the heat of August to harvest a crop that's really more a cool weather crop. So anyway, just a couple things if you are already gardening. Now, if you are not and you're in a new space, this is the time to do your research for next spring. This is the time to get your soil tests. This is the time to observe water movement in your yard. Is there standing water? Where does, when you have heavy rainfall, what happens to the water? And if it is a problem, you may need to do a raised bed or look at some drainage. Also watch the pattern of the sun. If you're not getting enough sun, then you may want to remove one of those barriers or reposition your garden. A lot of that work can be done before the soil prep. And then I would start with soil prep and probably go to the extension with a soil sample extension office and make sure you know what you're working with, and then get everything ready to plant in the spring. And I always tell new gardeners that it's good to start small, but with a plan for expansion. So you could have one space that's ready for spring and then another space that's ready for next fall or the following spring as you gain skills. Um, the rest of you, like if you've already got a garden that's going, you probably have a system for managing it in the fall. But we have sections because we have about a quarter acre total. And so there is this part that's fall garden that I will, let it go on. But the rest of the garden, we will clean up and we will put our amendments on in the fall, till everything in, and have it ready to go for spring first thing. Because in spring in Missouri, we have lots of cool wet days, and it's really hard to work the soil. So if everything's ready to go, then you're a step ahead. Some great resources for information. I typically in the gardening group have passed out a gardening calendar from the University of Missouri. It looks something like this for each month, and they have not done an August, September one yet. So I'm not sure what's going on there, if they're changing priorities or doing it differently. But I've found an even better resource, I think, and it's K-State. They You can sign up. Looking, go to on the website the K-State Research and Extension Home, Lawn, and Garden, and they have a detailed weekly email. You can sign up for the horticulture newsletter that way, and it is has lots and lots of detail. Things like this last couple weeks were like, how do you tell that when an apple's ripe, and like when should you pick pears, because that's kind of tricky. And then it also talked about summer squash and when summer squash should be harvested, or I'm sorry, winter squash should be harvested, which we typically think of as is sometime in September. But reminded me of my spaghetti squash from last summer. So I went down to the basement because I probably had, I don't know, 50, and we got tired of it. We got really tired of it. I cooked some, froze some, ate some, gave some away, but I had some that were left. And so I have two down there, and I brought one. This was harvested almost a year ago, and it's fine. Spaghetti squash, when they rot, they don't smell and get all goopy. They just turn hollow inside, and so they're real lightweight. This one is still heavy. The other one was as well. There is no damage on the exterior, and I'm quite sure it would be fine to use. So that's good to know as well. I love things that when you harvest them, they don't take a lot of prep. Sweet potatoes are like that. We cleaned out all our sweet potatoes because we're ready to harvest again. But there were some that were perfectly edible, stored from last year in a basement. I have like those big plastic shelves that have space for air movement in them, and I just lay the things out on there, and it just seems to be the right temperature and the right humidity that these spaghetti squash, pumpkins, sweet potatoes, all those things keep beautifully. Another thing I wanted to show you, we're harvesting right now peppers, and I think this is good to know. When you read about storage of peppers, you'll sometimes read where they say to roast them and peel them. And I always wondered about that because it seems like an unnecessary step. And then finally, in one of these things from K-State, I was reading about that. The reason for that is some varieties of peppers have a tough skin, but most do not. So if you have one that has a tough skin on it, then you could go on and roast and peel it. Otherwise, all you need to do with these things is wash them. I just brought it out of the garden, so you still have some good Cass County dirt on it. But you just wash them, slice them, or chop them, however you prefer, and freeze them. And they're perfectly good to use throughout the winter for stir fries or fajitas or in soups or however you prefer. Peppers are abundant right now. They're really coming into season right now. We're still getting a few tomatoes, okra that I don't have time to pick, a few melons, and then the pumpkins are really beginning to dry. Mine were early, and I'm going to tell you my whole thing about pumpkins, because so often we think about pumpkins in terms of jack-o'-lanterns. Well, I grow pumpkins for the seeds, and I was thinking, wow, I don't know, that's a lot of trouble. And it seems like I get these pumpkins, and I use them for fall decorations as well. But I get these pumpkins, and they're just a real pain to crack open, and the seeds are a real pain. And is it really worth it? Well, I read about them again because I was confused about how to process them. And what I found out is, yes, they're worth it. They are highly nutritious. And I'm reaching for my pumpkin now so I can show you. These are a hulless seeded pumpkin. And this variety is Kai, comes from Johnny Seeds. There are several varieties. If you would choose to plant these, you can look it up online for different seed varieties and locations of for purchase. But they are a hulless oil seeded pumpkin. So what you do, when I'm ready for it, this one is actually ready. This is the right color and it's curing. And I only had 2 plants and I've got probably 20 pumpkins. So they're quite prolific. I will cut it in half, and with these you have to use a hatchet. They're just hard as they can be. Scoop out the seeds, wash the seeds, dry the seeds. And then these seeds have a look like this. And these are some that I've done before. They have a little papery, I'm trying to get it to where you can see. They have a little papery coating on the pumpkin seeds. And then you can just eat them. You can eat them raw, or you can roast them. You can add flavorings to them, and then store them, in the freezer or refrigerator, depending on how long it is before you're going to use them. These I've stored for 2 years in the basement, and they're perfectly fine. And I had some that I had seasoned, and I thought they were a little overdone. But inside, they look like this. And that's different than those little green pumpkin seed pepitas that you see when you're buying pumpkin seeds sometimes. And that's what started me on this search, because I was like, what is the difference between them? And it has to do with variety. A lot of those came out of hulls, and you can eat the hull and you can eat the inside of the hull, but a lot of people don't really care for them. And depending on the variety of pumpkin, they may not be as tasty, where these are made for eating without a hull, and they are an oily type seed. So you can roast them, and with a mortar and pestle, you can press an oil out of it. And you're thinking, okay, so why would I do that? Well, when you find out how nutritious they are, you will think again, and you may want to stir them into oatmeal, or I don't know. I have not. That's the only obvious thing I thought of as a way to sneak them in. But you can probably come up with some creative ways to do it yourself. But they are rich in nutrients, including zinc, magnesium, copper. They're high in iron. And in fact, they're one of the very best sources of magnesium. So they are something that you can use. Now, not a large quantity at a time, usually, but for a handful a day, a very healthy snack. So you might consider that as another use of your pumpkins. And again, any pumpkin seeds are edible. Some are just more appealing than others. And some have hulls, some do not. And this is a hulless variety. So this is not the kind that you would carve because the outer coating is just so tough. But inside it's and actually the flesh, there isn't much flesh in these. These are mostly for seeds, which is why I grow them. And I'm going to be a better at saving them and using them. And again, this is when I would love for you to be here to ask questions, to share ideas of things that you have done that have been helpful. I'm going to briefly look and see if I can find a couple things that we might not have thought of. I told you about the calendars. I told you about the 2 resources, MU Extension and K-State Extension, which are both good for this area. More detail in the K-State newsletters. Even things like when you're wanting to know about if you grow fruit, black rot on apples, how to identify and how to treat it. Or like if there's a new insect that you're not able to identify, Master Gardeners can help you with that. Or you can also look it up online on one of their websites, on one of the University Extension websites, and super, super helpful. The next video I do will concentrate on some of the things you should plant in the fall. And yes, there are things we plant in the fall. One would be garlic, and then the perennial onions and shallots. So if you're interested in any of that, those things are planted like the last week of October, first week of November, and then you harvest them at the end of June or beginning of July. And they are a wonderful thing to have just in your pantry or in your basement stored for use throughout that time. So that will be your next video, and then other seasonal things related to late fall planting. Thank you so much. And remember, if you have any questions, be sure and get in touch with us. I want to take a moment to show you our very wet and very weedy fall garden. These green beans were planted back in the heat toward mid to late July, and they've been watered carefully, but they are going to be gorgeous. Few beets coming up in the midst of the purslane, some turnips, kale, a little bit of lettuce, and then under the row cover I have broccoli, cauliflower, and cabbage. That row cover is a spun polyester type fabric that's on wire hoops, and that will also protect later in the season against frost. It's a great way to extend the season.